Welcome to English Journey. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more exciting and captivating stories. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Stranger. It all started on a bright spring morning in a charming little village nestled in the mountains of Colorado called Alpine Meadows. There was a cozy cafe with outdoor tables where a young man sat enjoying his breakfast. He sipped his coffee, gazed up at the clear blue sky, and felt the warm sun on his face. Mark Rivers was content. The waiter approached his table. "More coffee?" he asked. "Yeah, great," replied Mark, handing over his cup. The waiter noticed the camera lying on the table. "On vacation?" he inquired. "San Diego," Mark said with a laugh. "But I'm not here for fun. I'm a travel photographer working on a book about North American landscapes. I've captured some stunning shots of your mountain." They both looked up at the majestic peak behind the village, glowing beautifully under the morning sun. "Do you travel often?" the waiter asked curiously. "All the time," Mark responded. "I write books and contribute to travel magazines. My work covers everything: countries, towns, villages, rivers, mountains, and people." The waiter glanced past Mark toward someone across the street. "There's a woman watching you," he said casually. "Do you know her?" Mark turned his head cautiously. "No, I don't think so," he said. But the waiter grinned knowingly before heading back inside. Mark looked again. She was around 26, strikingly beautiful, and indeed seemed to be staring directly at him. After a moment, she shifted her gaze to a shop window nearby. Then, after another glance, her eyes returned to Mark. He observed her closely. "She looks nervous," he thought. "What's going on? Is she waiting for someone?" Suddenly, she smiled warmly, crossed the street, and took a seat at his table without hesitation. Placing her half-open bag down, she introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Clara. Do you remember me? We met at a party in Denver." "Denver?" Mark chuckled. "Sorry, but I don't recall meeting you there. Or anywhere else, really." Clara hesitated but didn't move. Instead, she laughed lightly. "Maybe it was Portland or Seattle instead." Mark shrugged good-naturedly. "Well, would you like some coffee, Clara?" he offered. Though the story about the party wasn't true, it was such a lovely morning, and she was undeniably attractive. Perhaps they could chat anyway. As they talked, Clara appeared distracted, frequently glancing across the road. A tall, thin man with cropped gray hair strolled by, drawing her attention. "Are you expecting someone?" Mark questioned gently. "No," she replied quickly. "Just passing through," she added vaguely when he asked what brought her to Alpine Meadows. Meanwhile, Mark noticed a letter peeking out of her bag. It mentioned something about meeting at the Grand Pacific Hotel in Victoria, British Columbia on Friday afternoon. So, she was heading to Canada next. Their conversation continued as Mark explained his profession as a travel writer. "That sounds fascinating," Clara remarked, though her tone lacked genuine enthusiasm. Her expression remained tense, betraying her words. Soon enough, the older man with gray hair entered the cafe, choosing a table nearby. Clara watched him discreetly, then looked away just as fast. "Do you recognize him?" Mark probed. "Not at all," she insisted firmly. Once she finished her coffee, she stood abruptly. "I should go now," she declared. Before Mark could respond, Clara placed her hands on either side of his face and kissed him unexpectedly. "Drive safely, Mr. Hollywood," she whispered with a radiant smile before walking off briskly. Confused, Mark watched her enter a nearby hotel. What had just happened? From above, the mysterious Clara peered down from her room, observing Mark and the gray-haired man who trailed him moments later. When Mark left the cafe, the man followed shortly after. Outside, Mark climbed into his car while the stranger hopped into a red sedan parked nearby. As Clara witnessed this exchange from her window, she smirked faintly, gathering her belongings. Little did anyone realize, their paths were only beginning to intertwine in ways none of them anticipated. Chapter 2. A Hand in the Back. That evening in his hotel room in Seattle, Mark couldn't stop thinking about the woman from the Alpine Meadows Cafe. Why did she come and sit with him? She didn't know him, and that story about meeting at a party in Denver wasn't true. Something was troubling her. But what? And that kiss? It had been nice, of course, but why did she do it? Maybe she liked his face or his green eyes, he mused. But he wouldn't see her again, so it didn't matter. Forget it, he told himself. He put some money in his pocket and headed downstairs to the hotel restaurant. However, there were no free tables, so he walked down to Pike Place Market and found a cozy spot there. After dinner, Mark decided to take a stroll. Seattle was a lively city, and he enjoyed wandering through Pike Place Market and Chinatown, peeking into shops and watching the bustling crowd. It was nearly dark now, and the evening was busy with people and traffic. As time passed, Mark began making his way back to the hotel. He reached a busy street and waited with a small group of people to cross. Standing next to him was a tall woman in a red dress. She turned and smiled. "It's the first warm evening of spring," she said. "It's nice to be out after such a long, cold winter." "Yeah, it's great," Mark replied. Suddenly, without warning, he felt a hand shove him forcefully from behind. He stumbled forward, falling flat on his face right in front of a large black car. People screamed, but the driver slammed on the brakes just inches from Mark's head. The woman in the red dress rushed into the road and helped him to his feet. "Are you okay? What happened?" she asked anxiously. The driver of the black car shouted angrily, but Mark barely heard him. "Somebody pushed me," he exclaimed. "I didn't fall. Someone pushed me." "Pushed you?" the woman echoed. "Who? I didn't see anyone." Mark glanced around at the faces of the people nearby, but none of them looked familiar. Then he caught sight of a man's back. A tall, thin figure with very short gray hair walking quickly away down the street without looking back. "Hey! You!" Mark shouted. "Wait!" But the man didn't stop and soon disappeared into the crowd. "Did he push you?" the woman in the red dress asked. I don't know," Mark admitted. "Do you know him?" she pressed. "No, I don't know his name," Mark replied. "But I recognize that short gray hair. Where have I seen it before?" The woman started to move away. "I must get home," she said. "Are you okay now?" "Yeah, I'm okay," Mark assured her. "Thanks for your help." "You're welcome," she smiled. "Be careful." Back in his hotel room, Mark sat on the edge of his bed, replaying the incident in his mind. It was an accident, he reasoned. Nobody pushed me. It was an accident. Nobody wants to kill me. And there are hundreds of men in Seattle with gray hair. Yet, sleep eluded him. At 1 a.m., he lay awake, listening to the distant hum of cars outside and staring at the night sky through his window. He tried to focus on writing more of his book about landscapes, but his thoughts kept drifting elsewhere. There were several magazines scattered around the room, none particularly interesting, but Mark picked one up idly. Flipping through its pages, he came across a photograph, a striking image of the woman from the cafe. He studied it closely. Yes, it was her, Clara. Only, the caption beneath read differently. Canadian entrepreneur Daniel Grant and his daughter Emma, enjoying their garden at their estate near Calgary. Emma Grant, not Clara, not the mysterious stranger. Emma Grant, the daughter of a wealthy businessman. Why had she approached him in the cafe? Why had she kissed him goodbye? Millionaires' daughters didn't typically strike up conversations with strangers in cafes, let alone leave with dramatic gestures like that. What did she want? Mark thought back to the cafe and the events of that morning. His memory flickered to the man sitting nearby, a tall, thin individual around 60 years old, with very short gray hair. That same man who'd been watching them both. Mark froze as realization dawned. Could this all be connected? Who was Emma really, and why had she involved him in whatever game she was playing? Mark tossed and turned, unable to find peace. Sleep evaded him that night, leaving only questions swirling in his mind. Chapter 3. A Walk in the Park. The next day was Friday. Mark spent the morning in his hotel room writing about landscapes, focusing on mountains. In the afternoon, he drove to Discovery Park. He sat there for an hour, reading a book under the shade of towering trees. Then he decided to take a walk. The park was quiet, almost deserted, giving him space to think. Thoughts of Emma Grant and the man with gray hair filled his mind. Did they know each other? Why had Emma warned him to drive carefully, Mr. Hollywood? Why had she called him that? None of it made sense. Suddenly he heard a sound, a sharp crack. Asterisk, that's a gunshot, he realized. Another followed quickly after. Someone was shooting at him. Mark froze for a moment before breaking into a sprint. The dense forest offered little light. Shadows loomed around him, making it hard to see. There were no people nearby, no one to help. I need to get to my car, he thought desperately. Find some people. Call the police. He ran faster, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Behind him, he could hear footsteps chasing him. After several minutes, he stopped abruptly and listened. Silence. No more shots. No pursuit. Fear gripped him as questions raced through his mind. Why is someone trying to kill me? First, I'm pushed in front of a car, and now this. He waited a few seconds longer, then cautiously retraced his steps back toward his vehicle. Every rustle of leaves made him flinch, but nothing moved, and no shots rang out again. As he neared the edge of the woods, he spotted families picnicking, children playing soccer, and two men walking their dog. Relief washed over him. No one can shoot me here, not with all these witnesses. 10 minutes later, Mark reached his car. On the windshield lay a note. I'm going to kill you, Mr. Hollywood. Heart pounding, he drove straight to the nearest police station. After waiting nearly half an hour, a weary young officer led him into a small interview room. Mark recounted everything: the mysterious woman, the man with gray hair, the shootings, and the threatening letter. The officer scribbled notes but seemed unimpressed. So what are you going to do? Mark asked. Nothing, the officer replied bluntly. Nothing? But someone shot at me. Mr. Rivers, the officer sighed. How many people in this city own guns? You didn't see the shooter, man, boy, or woman. A color? Hair length? Without concrete evidence, this is just speculation. Frustrated, Mark pressed further. What about the man with gray hair? Emma Grant called me Mr. Hollywood in the cafe, and this man must have heard her. Now I receive a letter addressed to Mr. Hollywood. Who is this person? The officer shrugged. We all want answers, Mr. Rivers, but sometimes we don't get them. Questions without answers. Defeated, Mark left the station and returned to his hotel. Anger and fear gnawed at him. How did the man with gray hair find me in Seattle? Did he follow me from Alpine Meadows? Is he still watching me? Could he even be staying in the same hotel? Chapter 4: The Man with Gray Hair. Mark parked his car in front of the hotel and scanned the area carefully before getting out. Seeing no sign of the man with gray hair, he hurried inside. At the reception desk, he approached the clerk. Excuse me, he began. I'm looking for a man with very short gray hair. He's about 60 years old, tall and thin. I think he's staying here. The clerk barely looked up. This is a large hotel, she said dismissively. There are dozens of guests matching that description. Do you know his name? No, I don't, Mark admitted. He's a friend of a friend. He arrived yesterday and finding him is urgent. Please, can you help? The clerk glanced at him briefly. We have 350 rooms here, she explained, and probably 30 or 40 men with gray hair. How am I supposed to remember all their names? With that, she turned away to answer a ringing phone. Mark walked away, frustration mounting. A drink, he thought. I need a drink. He entered the hotel bar, ordered a beverage, and sat down at a table. What should I do now? He wondered. Then, inspiration struck. Back in the cafe, he'd seen a letter peeking out of Emma Grant's bag. We can meet at the Grand Pacific Hotel in Victoria, Vancouver Island, on Friday afternoon. And today was Friday. I'm heading to Victoria, he resolved. To the Grand Pacific Hotel. That evening, Mark dined in the hotel restaurant. As he finished his meal and stood up, he noticed the man with gray hair near the reception desk. Acting quickly, Mark pushed past other patrons, nearly tripping over a child who darted across his path. Hey! The child's mother scolded. I'm so sorry, Mark apologized, helping the boy to his feet. By the time he looked back toward the desk, the man with gray hair was gone. Desperate, Mark shouted to the clerk, that man, with the short gray hair, where did he go? Mr. Vickers? The clerk asked. Vickers? Is that his name? Mark demanded. What's his room number? I'm sorry, I can't give out that information, she replied firmly before turning away to answer another call. Mark trudged upstairs to his room, anxiety bubbling within him. Vickers, he thought. Does Emma Grant know Mr. Vickers? I need answers, and I need them fast. Chapter 5, Vancouver Island. Portview was about 23 miles south of Seattle. Mark drove there early the next morning to catch the 1 p.m. ferry to Oak Harbor on Whidbey Island. Every 5 minutes, he glanced in his rearview mirror. The road buzzed with activity, black cars, white cars, red cars, green cars. Could Vickers be hiding in one of them? As Mark reached Portview, he parked his car on the ferry. Crowds milled about, and Mark stepped out to pace up and down the deck. He scanned the faces, searching for a man with gray hair, but found no one matching the description. Once the ferry departed, Mark felt a wave of relief. He entered the ship's cafe and grabbed something to eat. More passengers joined him, and Mark scrutinized every older man who entered. Some wore hats, so he focused on tall, thin individuals, but none stood out. Maybe he's not on this ferry, Mark thought. Later, as he wandered around the vessel again, he briefly spotted someone who resembled the man with gray hair among the crowd, but he couldn't confirm it. 90 minutes after leaving Portview, the ferry arrived at Oak Harbor on Whidbey Island. Mark returned to his car and resumed driving toward Langley, located 20 miles north of Victoria. Again, he checked his mirrors every few minutes. At one point, he noticed a silver car trailing about 200 yards behind him. Did I see that car earlier on the way from Seattle to Portview? He wondered. Slowing down didn't change the distance between them, and Mark couldn't make out the driver's face. Once he entered the busy streets of Victoria, the silver car vanished. Victoria was renowned for its lush gardens and historic architecture, yet Mark had no interest in sightseeing today. He navigated straight to the Grand Regency Hotel, entered, and approached the reception desk. "Can I help you?" asked a young clerk. "I'm meeting a friend here this afternoon," Mark replied. "Miss Grant." "Grant." The clerk paused, then returned. "Sorry, but there's no Miss Grant staying here." Mark pulled out the magazine photo of Emma and her father. "This is her," he said. "Oh, right, you mean Daniel Grant's daughter," the clerk realized. "She's not staying here, but I saw her about 10 or 15 minutes ago. She was with someone. A man." "Where did they go?" Mark pressed. "The Tio Cafe," the clerk answered. Meanwhile, the man with gray hair grew increasingly agitated. Sleepless and restless, all he could think about was finding Mark. Driving through Victoria's crowded streets, he lost sight of the blue car ahead. Frustrated, he circled past major hotels until spotting the Grand Regency. Outside, he noticed a familiar blue car. Leaving his vehicle, he sprinted back down the street, crossing the road and peering into the downstairs windows of the hotel. In the grand dining room filled with tables and people, he finally spotted her. Emma Grant. Two men sat beside her, their backs turned, but one wore a green shirt. "Mr. Hollywood," the man muttered with a grin. "Goodbye, Mr. Hollywood." Passers-by turned to stare, but he ignored them, heading toward the hotel doors. His hand dipped into his pocket, clutching the cold steel of his gun. Chapter 6. A Tea Party. Mark peeked through the glass doors of the Tio Cafe inside the Grand Regency Hotel. There she was, Emma Grant, seated at a table with a man. The man appeared to be in his late 20s, tanned from the sun, dressed casually in a white shirt, trousers, and loafers. Whatever he said made Emma laugh. She looked genuinely happy. A waiter approached Mark. "Can I get you some tea?" "No, thanks," Mark declined. "I'm with the two people over there." He strode across the room. "Hello, mystery girl," Mark greeted, standing beside Emma's table. "We met in Alpine Meadows. Your name was Clara then, but maybe today it's Emma Grant." Emma looked up, her face flushing crimson. "Oh, who is this, Emma?" the man asked. "This is Nick," Emma introduced hesitantly. "Nick, this is Ryan Carter, sometimes called Mr. Hollywood." "Maybe," Mark responded dryly. "But how did you know that?" Ryan's expression faltered. "What are you talking about?" "I guessed," Mark admitted, "and I think I'm starting to understand. Can I ask you a question, Mr. Carter? Does someone want to kill you?" Ryan paled visibly. "Kill me? What are you saying?" Emma demanded. "Before I tell you, answer this first," Mark insisted. You called me Mr. Hollywood in Alpine Meadows and wanted the man at the next table, the one with gray hair, to hear you. Is that correct? Emma hesitated before nodding quietly. Yes. Why? Mark probed further. I think he's a detective, Emma confessed. Working for my father. I saw him shortly after leaving Calgary. He's been following me ever since. My father doesn't approve of Ryan. A month ago, he told me never to see him again. I've defied him, and he knows it. I believe he suspected I'd meet Ryan here, and now he wants to stop us. Or worse. No, Emma, Mark interjected. Your father might not intend harm, but this man, Vickers, he pushed me in front of a car in Seattle. And he shot at me in Discovery Park. What? Emma gasped. Ryan leaned forward urgently. Tell me more about this man with gray hair. He's about 60, tall and thin, Mark described. Do you know his name? Vickers, Ryan whispered hoarsely. The color drained from Ryan's face. Did he follow you to Victoria? Did he follow you here? I don't know, Mark admitted. But why are you afraid of him? Why does Vickers want to kill you? Before Ryan could respond, Emma's eyes widened in horror. Oh no! Look! By the door stood the man with gray hair, scanning the room. Spotting them, he began walking toward their table, his hand concealed in his pocket. For a moment no one moved. Then Ryan leapt to his feet. That's Mr. Hollywood, Ryan screamed, pointing accusingly at Mark. That man there. The man's hand emerged from his pocket, gripping a gun. This is for Anna, he shouted. Reacting instinctively, Mark knocked the tea table aside and dove to the floor as the gunshot rang out above him. Emma screamed. Simultaneously, Ryan cried out, clutching his arm, blood seeping through his pristine white shirt. Chaos erupted. People shrieked, and two waiters tackled the man with gray hair to the ground. Get the police! Someone shouted. Chapter 7. At the police station. It was 7:30 p.m. Mark and Emma were in a room at the police station, while the man known as Vickers was being questioned in another room by 3 detectives. A doctor attended to him as well. Ryan Carter had been taken to the hospital. The door opened, and Detective Thompson entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed them on the table and turned to leave. Detective Thompson, Emma called out. Did the hospital call? Is Ryan going to be all right? Yes, he'll be okay, Detective Thompson replied. Can I call the hospital now? Emma asked. I'd like you to wait, Thompson said. Detective Hayes is on his way from the airport. As if on cue, a second detective walked in, followed by a tall man with dark hair. Daddy! Emma exclaimed, standing abruptly. What are you doing here? The police contacted me, Daniel Grant explained. I flew here immediately. Detective Hayes met me at the airport. Now sit down, Emma. I want you to listen carefully. Emma sat down as her father took her hands. Last week, Jonathan Vickers came to my house, he began. He wanted to talk about his daughter. You remember Anna, don't you, Emma? 3 months ago, she jumped off a bridge in Seattle and died. She was young, beautiful, wealthy, and desperate. Why? Because she loved a man who stole her money, ran away, and left her heartbroken. That man went by the name Mr. Hollywood. No! Emma cried, shaking her head. Tears streamed down her face. That's right, Miss Grant. Detective Hayes interjected calmly. When Anna Vickers knew him, he called himself Carl Windsor, but he liked all his girlfriends to refer to him as Mr. Hollywood. He swindled nearly $50,000 from Anna Vickers, and there were others before her. It's not true, Emma shouted. It is true, Emma, her father insisted firmly. Winters or Windsor gets his money from rich men's daughters. When Anna died, Jonathan Vickers visited her home. He read her letters, learned about the money, and discovered the name Mr. Hollywood. When he came to my house, I told him about you, Emma. I said, my daughter has a new boyfriend, and she calls him Mr. Hollywood. I don't like him, but I can't stop her. She's planning to meet him next week. What can I do? Jonathan put his hand on my arm and said, don't worry about your daughter. I'm going to find that man and stop him. For a moment, silence filled the room. Emma sat frozen, her face pale. Then Detective Thompson spoke up. Vickers told us everything, Miss Grant. He followed you to Alpine Meadows and saw you with Mark in the cafe. You called him Mr. Hollywood, which confirmed what Vickers suspected. Daniel Grant turned to Mark. You're the travel writer, aren't you? He asked. Mark Rivers. Yes, Mark replied. Vickers nearly killed me. He shot at me twice, but Daniel seemed uninterested in Mark's ordeal. His gaze returned to his daughter. How much money did you give him, Emma? He demanded. I gave him $25,000, Emma admitted softly. Only for 2 or 3 months, her father muttered bitterly. Well, you can kiss that money goodbye. What's going to happen to Vickers? Mark asked Detective Thompson. Hospital, I think, Thompson responded. He shot at you and around 50 people witnessed it. But he's not a well man. The doctors will likely place him in a psychiatric facility. Daniel stood up. All right, Emma, I'm taking you home. My plane is waiting at the airport. Emma followed her father toward the door but paused, remembering Mark. She turned back. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I got you into all this. Calling you Mr. Hollywood was wrong. I didn't realize. It's okay, Mark reassured her. You know everything now, and it's better to learn the truth sooner rather than later, before losing $50,000. Chapter 8. A Nice Smile. Mark took the evening ferry back to Seattle. Exhausted and famished, he headed straight to the ferry's dining area. It was bustling with activity, and only one table remained free. Mark quickly claimed it and began eating. I need to focus on my work tomorrow, he thought. Forget about millionaires' daughters and men with guns. Asterisk. Excuse me, a voice said. Can I sit with you? Mark looked up to see a pretty young woman standing beside his table. He stood politely. It's fine, he said. You can have this table. I'm done here. He started to move away, but the woman stopped him. Please don't go, she said, smiling warmly. Stay and finish your dinner. Her smile was friendly, inviting even, but Mark had learned to tread cautiously. I'm not hungry, he replied curtly and hurried out of the restaurant. Outside, the cool night air greeted him. As the ferry sailed through the calm waters, Mark reflected on the past few days. Life, he realized, was full of surprises, some pleasant, others perilous. But one thing was certain. He would stick to his camera, his notebook, and the open road. For now, that was enough.